We've made it to the Derby. Andrew Champagne and Darin Zoccali join me to preview the 2024 Kentucky Derby. We'll go horse by horse, share some thoughts on everyone in the field. And for all of you out there who are doing your Kentucky Derby prep, make sure you head on over to drf.com and check out the Kentucky Derby packages that are now available. Past performances available for Oaks Friday and for Derby Day Saturday. All the tools that you need to help be successful in your handicapping and your wagering. Darin Zoccali, my friend, this year when we look at the field for the Derby, as far as the morning line odds are set, they've set two horses as a definite top tier above everyone else. Only three horses are under 10-1, but we have Fierceness at 5-2 as your morning line favorite. We have Leone at 3-1 as your second choice. And just funny that your top two choices are totally different as far as running styles, the type of horses they are overall. So it's funny that we have them as a starting point to talk about.
Yeah, this has been a while since we've had two kind of standouts from a morning line perspective. Normally, we're looking at like a 4-1 favorite or, a bunch of horses kind of clumped together. So to have two horses as standalone choices like this is, it's been a while since we've seen this. I feel this strongly, but yeah, you're 100% right. You got Fierceness, who is a horse that wants to be close. You have Sierra Leone, who's an obviously out the back deep run closer, and you have a race that's got a lot of speed. It's got some significant post position implications as well. That's going to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench into things, and it turns out to be a pretty fantastic race to handicap.
Andrew, give us a little bit of your overall assessment of the Derby field and maybe a thought on the top choices.
Sure. So I guess I'll start this off with one of the things that I've been talking to a couple of different people about, and that is if you're going to play this race and you insist on playing exactas, you need to, I think, toss one of those two horses. Otherwise, you're just throwing money at combinations that are not going to pay a lot. I'm never going to be confused for the ticket police, okay? So don't get that twisted. But in a field this big, where there are 20 times 19, that would be 380 possible exacta combinations, don't throw your bets away on potential wagers that aren't going to return what is likely the cost of your bet. And that is the case with any exacta that features both Sierra Leone and Fierceness. I think you can absolutely back one of them, but you need to throw out at least one, maybe even both of them, if you want to hit this race for a significant amount of money. And then if it comes in chalk in the exacta, you tip your hat and move on. I don't think it's a wise play to play exacta tickets that use both of them.
DZ, Dornach was a horse that was really precocious early on at 2. Dornach was a horse who we see like every year where they are just a little bit faster, maybe a little bit farther ahead of the game. He just has never really seemed to take a step forward into his 3-year-old season. And his 2 races that we have for a measuring stick, they're so difficult to get a feel for, because one of them, the whole field basically scratched down. He didn't end up having any type of resistance at all whatsoever in the Fountain of Youth that day. The other speed scratched. He ends up getting just a cakewalk around the track. And then in the Bluegrass, he was sitting inside and he just doesn't really want to pass horses. Just kind of ran around the track. I'm not really high on him because I just haven't seen him, progress at all. From the inside draw, it does just feel like they have to go. We know his brother last year, Mage, won the Derby, so he has pedigree, and he'll take some money just because of that. Where do you stand with Dornach?
Conflicted. And we, like you mentioned, I mean, this is the full brother to last year's Kentucky Derby winner. And by the way, they couldn't look or run more differently than one another. Mage was a smaller, compact horse who typically rallied from off the pace. Dornach is a tall, long-bodied front runner. So it's kind of funny how they're in complete contrast to one another. It's a cool story. I mean, I can't remember if this has ever happened before, where you had brothers like this in back-to-back years. Yeah, I'm conflicted because I think he's a really good racehorse. Coming out of the Remsen, he's the only horse to beat Sierra Leone. That shouldn't be something that people just wash over. Sierra Leone's lost one race in his life, and it was to Dornach.
And when you watch that race back, like Sierra Leone had about a length on him.
Oh, I know.
I forget how far
some
Sierra
of us
Leone
needed Sierra Leone.
Yeah,
I know.
Many of us.
Yes,
many of
yes.
us. So we don't forget at all.
In my head, it was just like he came up on even terms with him, but he was like a full length, watching it back.
But let me pose this situation. So let's say that in the Fountain of Youth Stakes, coming off of a 3-month respite, he wasn't 100%. He wasn't 100% cranked. I think that's something that we can all willingly say is a distinct possibility. And then in the Bluegrass, Danny Gargan said, we need to find out if this horse can win at this level without gunning to the front. And unfortunately, the answer to that question is no. Now you just take that off the table. Now you take, yeah. So the one good thing about this horse is that there's no question what they're going to try to do. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying he's definitely quick enough to make the lead, because that's a different conversation that is worthy to have. But he's from post one. That they are all out sending this horse to the front. And he's sitting alongside of one of the deepest closers in the field. Mystic Dan is 2 slots over, who doesn't always get off to the sharpest beginning. And 3 slots over is one of the other deepest closers in the field. My point being, he might be able to get clear of those 3 really quickly and find himself in a nice spot. And if that happens, who knows? What he's going to try to do. Where he's going to be if he breaks well. I don't think the way that this draw shaked out, I don't think the one hole is going to hurt him. I think because of the closers that are lined up against him. I think the question is just going to be, is he good enough? And I'm not at a point yet, guys, where I am, like some others, have completely just written this horse off. I'm not at that point with him yet.
Andrew, as Darin pointed out, I think we know what he's going to do, or at the very least, what he should do, what his best chances of winning or being really competitive in this race are. Go.
Yeah. This is a horse that when this horse gets to the lead at the first point of call, he's 3 for 3. Nobody's ever passed him and gotten first to the wire when this horse makes the early lead. The thing is, though, I understand if the idea was, okay, let's see if we can rate him in the Bluegrass. Isn't he at least supposed to get third there? I mean, that was underwhelming, to put it mildly. And those horses are serious horses that are showing up against him. We'll talk about Sierra Leone. We'll talk about Just a Touch. I look at the Remsen and I see a horse that rode an absolute gold rail at Aqueduct. Copyright Andy Serling, all rights reserved, and then got everything all his own way again in the Fountain of Youth, when a number of horses that would have provided some opposition to him scratched, including one horse, a highly touted Todd Pletcher trainee, who scratched about 15 minutes before the race. No thanks for me on Dornach. I do think he could potentially make the lead, but he just doesn't stack up quite as well as I think some others think that he does. I spoke with someone earlier today, actually, who has a future ticket on Dornach, and I had to tell him, good luck. I'm pulling for you, but he's not going to be on any of my tickets. And if he beats me, I'll tip my cap and I'll move on. And by the way, if that happens, Puka is officially the greatest broodmare in the history of broodmares.
Gino, real quick, just to respond on the Bluegrass not getting third. If you watch the race, he had to kind of go from the rail all the way to the outside, turning for home, which is a move he's never made in his career. It's a move that I don't think he's going to have to make in the Derby. And he was running on the wrong lead until just outside the 16th pole. And when he does switch leads, he actually does kind of re-engage and move forward a bit again, which is why you see in that line, he's 5th by 4. then he's fourth, and he passed another horse. I think that's the answer to the question why he wasn't third. Again, I'm not saying he's good enough. I think people are just being a little bit too quick to dismiss this guy.
Really quick before we move on, one more thing. Doesn't this look like a horse that could get loose in the Belmont and forget to stop?
He does have that.
He could. I don't know if he's a 1.5 mile horse, but he could.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't have to worry about being a 1.5 mile horse this year or next year or anything like that.
Oh, yeah. We're up at Saratoga. That's right.
Yeah, that's true.
Think about it. Dornach seems like the horse that sets the early pace, fades to 8th or 9th, shows up in the Belmont, and at least hits the top of the stretch in front. It feels like there's a horse like that every 2 or 3 years. I'm
working with a couple different places right now. I got to talk to some people and see if we can get Andrew Champagne to champion the Belmont future wager. He's so behind it. I want you to put this whole thing together. Can I explain the backstory behind this before we move on? It's a great story. Please.
So back in 2013, there were a lot of things going on with me personally and professionally. And I used that summer meet at Saratoga to sort of escape from a lot of that. And there was one horse during the race that they used to run every single summer on Labor Day weekend for 2-year-olds going 1.125 miles as maidens. Commissioner ran that day. Could not have looked more impressive. Went 1.125 miles. Couldn't have blown a match out coming back. I looked to someone near me on the top of the Saratoga press box on the roof there, and I forget who it was, but I said, just for shits and giggles, there's your Belmont winner. 9 months later, Commissioner led the Belmont for 11.999 furlongs and got nailed by Tonalist right on the wire. That's the backstory for trying to pick Belmont winners in advance. When that happens to you one time and you get that close, it hurts.
Well, DZ, the number 2 Sierra Leone is a horse who people would assume could be a horse that would fit well for a Belmont race with the late running style. This is just a machine of a horse, honestly. Like, I watch him in the mornings. He goes out there. You just know what you're going to get from him. He's had not perfect setups in a couple races, and he's still gotten the job done, in particular in the that Risen Star, which has come back as the strongest of any of the prep races. He was one of 3 next out prep winners in that race, and Honor Marie was also 5th in there and came back and ran 2nd in the Louisiana Derby. So very, very strong field. And I have a hard time knocking him, other than in a race like this in 20 horses, he could get caught in traffic, and that could happen with any horse with his running style. But I feel really confident that he's going to be launching his rally late.
Yeah. Look, he's never run a bad race. He looks like the profile of a horse that, when others are starting to come back to the field, he's going to keep going forward. The post position, who gets the trip from the closers is always a question. There's a handful of horses that are going to be making those deep runs. And, it's certainly possible that he's going to have to do some maneuvering in and out of horses from the post that he's in. It'll be interesting to see what Tyler Gaffleone does. If you're talking about, I wouldn't use the word knocks, but if you're talking about concerns with this horse, I suppose it's the mental makeup. He's been high strung in the paddock at times. He's kind of, drifted in and out at different points of the stretch in some of his races. In the Bluegrass Stakes, he caused a several-minute delay, refusing to load. Chad Brown talked about the fact that he was paying attention to the crowd that day, and I got news for him. If he's paying attention to that crowd, just wait till Saturday. Now he's been working with the starter. I'm sure he's going to continue to. Chad has said all the right things, that he doesn't think it's going to be an issue. And I mean, at the same time, what trainer is going to come out and say, I do think it's going to be an issue? But that's, I guess, the concern with him. But yeah, he's as honest as the day is long. There's nothing not to like about him as a racehorse. I guess the question is going to be, is he on his best behavior? And from a trip standpoint, does he get a good break?
Andrew, talk some Sierra Leone.
Those are very valid questions, Darin, and I don't want to have those questions over a horse that's going to be at or near that 3-1 morning line price. When I said that I think you need to throw out one of those two, my strategy is I'm throwing out Sierra Leone. I see this horse as one that needs a fair bit to go right. Didn't get a great post. I don't think it's an insane, oh my goodness, disaster like I did right after the draw. Right after the draw, I remember thinking the only way this could have been worse is if he got the rail. But if he can tuck in behind where Dornach is and just lay back, it's not the end of the world. It's bad still. I think Mystic Dan is going to need to show a little bit of speed. I think Catching Freedom is going to try to lay back. Catalytic, though, is another one that's going to come over. Just Steel, I think, is going to come over. Just the Touch is going to come over. There's legitimate question marks about this horse to where if I was like our friend John Dooley, who said that he had a future bet on this horse at 7-1, 8-1, I'd think that would be a reasonably fair price. But at the current price, with all due respect to Sierra Leone, and there's a fair bit of it, he's a very nice horse. I see a head case who didn't get an ideal post, who's going to be in front of 150,000 screaming fans who have indulged in about 500,000 mint juleps at that point. To me, it's an underlay, and if Sierra Leone beats me, I will tip my cap and I will move on because he will likely have overcome a fair amount of adversity in order to do that.
One thing I'll say, Gino, before you move on, Andrew was talking about strategy and you have to make a stand against one of these favorites, even if you're talking about, in the underneath part of the exotics. Well, I will concede that of the two favorites, I believe Fierceness is the more likely winner. I would also say that of the two favorites, if you ask me which horse is more likely to run second or third, I would say Sierra Leone. Because I am of the opinion that if Fierceness is good on Saturday, he's really good. If Fierceness is not good on Saturday, he's nowhere at the finish line.
No argument here.
The next one, as we move through the field of 20, is Mystic Dan. Andrew, Mystic Dan's big bust-out performance came in the Southwest, where he earned a 101 Beyer speed figure on a muddy track that day. He got a great trip up the rail, and then he came back in the Arkansas Derby. He finished third. Didn't run poorly. It just wasn't really anything close to the race that he ran in the Southwest, but 6 weeks, almost 2 months earlier. He's one of the harder horses for me to get a feel for. I just don't really know what to expect from him, what kind of trip he really wants. Talk to me a little bit about Mystic Dan.
Darin, I know you have an engagement later this week hosting the trainers dinner, and I just hope that Kenny McPeak and company can pause their rain dance long enough in order to be in attendance. I know he said at the draw that Mystic Dan can run on anything. Bull. Mystic Dan and his connections want the skies to open up on Churchill Downs. That is this horse's best chance. I think the Southwest is inflated just a touch because he got an absolutely perfect trip along the rail. There was nobody in front of him, and he wound up spurting well clear of a whole bunch of horses that maybe didn't like the mud that day. He didn't run terribly in the Arkansas Derby. He didn't have a fantastic trip. He was a little bit wide, was a decent third, probably could have been a little bit closer on that particular occasion. If the weather cooperates, Mystic Dan will be a play against. If it pours, Mystic Dan has to at least be on some of my tickets.
DZ,
yeah,
go ahead on, Dan.
I don't disagree that the connections would like to see an off track. I do think that this horse has a shot, though. And the reason being, number one, he's got a big win with a big figure over a fast Churchill Downs track, albeit sprinting. I forgive the next race because that's a clear-cut bounce off a 13-day turnaround. I have no problem with that. In the Smarty Jones, there was a lot of traffic coming out of the starting gate where they got pinballed around. He ended up really close to a very honest pace, and he was right there. If you just look at the past performance line, you see fifth beaten 3 1/4. He gave it up, blah, 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 blah. If you watch the race, he was right there until maybe the last 70 yards of the race. So that race visually is better than what it looks like on the program page. The Southwest, Andrew gave you everything about that. The Arkansas Derby, He had a slow beginning. There was some really eventful stuff that went on with a couple of horses right by him on the first turn. One of them ended up in the middle of the racetrack, almost by the outside rail, and he had to take up a little bit and ended up farther back than he wants to be, and still overcame that adversity enough to run on past horses and finish a decent third. This is another horse that I think is better than people are giving him credit for. I'm not saying he's my pick, but he's working well. I respect Ken McPeak at Churchill Downs.
It's nice that he has a ceiling too that's high. You know that he's capable of a big effort under certain circumstances. And there's some horses that we don't ever even know can hit the level that he's hit. So when you're building cases for long shots, those are horses that are always nice, because there's a world where even if we get some moisture out there now, we're hearing the forecast could change a little bit. 20-1 on Mystic Dan. Catching Freedom has been catching a lot of buzz too, DZ. Not about really how he's doing in the morning or anything. I think people are just kind of looking at this race from a gambling standpoint. If they don't like the top two, they can come to Catching Freedom as a horse they feel checks a lot of the boxes for a Kentucky Derby pick, winner, horse that you think will run well. He's rapidly improving. While he wants to be towards the back of a lot of races, he's a little more versatile. I think he's just a little more handy than if you just look at the running lines, what it might sell to you. He's not like Sierra Leone, where I don't think he has to be 18th, 19th, 20th. I would not be shocked if he was closer to the middle of the pack, sitting 10th, 11th, 12th, somewhere like that. And he was never supposed to be the best of the Cox horses initially. You could just kind of see the way he was handled. But when Brad was asked about him, I think he even impressed him and how he's grown up. He's gotten better. He's gotten a little bit straighter late in races. He's not quite as green as he was. And he just looks like a nice horse that's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, he is a nice horse. Been some talk in the mornings that he's been outworked slightly by the horses he's been working with. I don't think he's ever been the greatest workhorse in the world, but his last move I was pretty impressed with the other day. Thought it looked fine. He looks great galloping on the track. He's one of those horses who looks like he's sitting on a loaded gun. He's got his neck bowed. He looks like he's loving life out there. I guess my question about Catching Freedom, well, there's twofold. Number one, he's a pretty small racehorse. It really noticed it when he worked the other day with Encino. Encino towers over this horse. And Encino is a big horse, but this is a small horse that is going to come from far behind, and he's going to get bounced around. Didn't happen in the Louisiana Derby, where he just fell out to the back of the pack, came from dead last, and literally went around everybody without so much as, brushing paint with anyone. So the question here from Pokes 4 is what happens when he gets pinballed? My other question with him is pretty simple. Have we seen his best race? Is he really going to take another step forward? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
His price will probably dictate it. If he goes cold and he goes off at 14-1, he's good value. If he goes hot and he goes off at 6-1, he's probably an underlay. So this is one of those horses that I don't discount their chances, but the odds board on this horse is going to determine just how much and where I use them.
Andrew, the number 4 is Catching Freedom. Third choice on the morning line.
Catching Freedom has a history of catching some really strange trips. If you look at his first 4 starts, you see the following: in tight, 4 to 6 wide, stymied at the 16th pole, steered 4 wide, 3 wide, and then to the 8th path. Finally gets united with Flavian Pratt in the Louisiana Derby. Gee, give a horse that needs a good trip one of the best riders in the country. Shocker! The horse finds a clean trip, doesn't just wind up winning, winds up going from last to first, and I want to take a look at the internal fractions from that race. I know that the time of a race isn't a perfect metric. There are certain measures that, maybe the track was playing fast that day, what have you. Here's what I like about the way he won the Louisiana Derby. They did not go very fast early on. You see 48-1, 112-2, 137-1. They're not walking but that's not a very fast pace where you would expect to see a horse go from dead last as far back as he was to passing everybody coming down the crown of the track. And if you look at the last 3/16 of a mile, this is a horse that traversed that distance in 18 seconds and change. He was flying late. And with that in mind, he's my second selection in here. I think there's every chance Catching Freedom is getting better and better. I think the Beyer speed figures that are on the screen right now, if you're watching the YouTube version of this, bear that out. You see 72, 77, 87, 92, 97, and you see Flavien Prat riding back, which I don't think is any surprise. Before we move on, though, I just want to point something out about the race 2 back in the Risen Star. How good was the Risen Star this year? The top 5 horses from that race are all in the Kentucky Derby field. You see the winner, Sierra Leone, Track Phantom ran second. You see Catching Freedom running third. You see the 4th place finisher, Resilience. All he did was come back, win the Wood Memorial. And then you see the 5th place finisher, Honor Marie, who is going to be bet heavier than 2 or 3 of the horses above him because of how he's been working. That was a really fun race, guys.
3 next out prep winners from that one. Very, very strong. And, you can understand why this horse is a major player. He's done very little wrong overall. I agree, DZ. He's so kind of strange to watch in the mornings with other horses because it's not like they paid $575,000 for the horse, right? We're not talking about a horse that was some rags to riches story, but he just doesn't visually look like a lot of the other regal royal horses that are in these types of races. And he just doesn't look like it. When he's out there with them, you point out he's not big. He's kind of small. He doesn't move all that great. He's just not flashy. And so it's always fascinating because so many of these horses jump off the page with how they look. He's kind of one of the opposite. And he's just another kind of tough, hard knocking horse here. Andrew,
one thing I was just going to say before we move on to Catalytic, and Andrew made the point about the pace in the Louisiana Derby and it not being fast. And one thing I'll say, number one, the track that day did play well to horses coming from off the pace. But my other concern is, despite what the pace looks like on paper, I would agree if not for the fact that not only did Catching Freedom win from last, but Anna Marie came from second to last to run second. So while it didn't appear to be that fast of a pace, the horses that were next to last and last ran 1-2. So I can't really just give full credit to Catching Freedom for closing into a slow pace while nobody else did.
The number 5 Catalytic was a horse that Andrew had some success with when you hit the exacta there on Florida Derby Day. Catalytic was no match for Fierceness. He was second. That's how he earned his points to qualify for this one. So he'll make his 3rd start of the year, 3rd start of the form cycle, super lightly raced. What about Catalytic and his chances of making any noise in here, Andrew?
Exactas like that are pretty fun to hit because you have a runaway winner, and then there's what seems like a dramatic pause that lasts an hour as you wait for the rest of the field to cross the wire because Fierceness literally ran off the screen. I liked Catalytic a little bit underneath in that spot because I thought the comeback race, he had a number of legitimate excuses in that particular spot. He had to come from way far back. Granted, this was going 6 furlongs at Tampa, right? So you wind up going from there to the Florida Derby. It's an ambitious spot, but give him some credit because at the very least, he wound up going with Fierceness a little bit early on, and he was 2.5 lengths clear of that day's 3rd place finisher. He ran fine. Running fine isn't going to cut it on Saturday. Good for Team Catalytic for getting to the Kentucky Derby. Good for Safi Joseph, who came under a lot of fire last year and wound up not being able to run horses at Churchill Downs for a period of time. But I don't think Catalytic has a prayer on Saturday.
DZ, big long shot in here. Any chance to hit the board or underneath?
Would have been a live player in the Pat Day Mile if he stretches out to 1.25 miles off 3 lifetime starts, only won around 2 turns, beaten and makes up 14 lengths on Fierceness. He's going to do it without my money. He would shock me.
Very much agree. DZ, if I gave you one pick on who trained the horse in the Kentucky Derby with the most starts you probably would be able to get it. And that's what the case is with Just Steel, who has a nice foundation. You do want that with a horse like this, right? You hope they're not tired, but in a race going 1.25 miles, fitness, stamina shouldn't be a problem for him. He's run pretty good races, like 5 of his last 6 races, and he's had to deal with off tracks a couple of times and ran okay there. What do you think about him at 20-1 in this spot?
Man, his form is a little in and out. The Rebel, he was wide on both turns, which obviously compromised him. Ran well in the Arkansas Derby behind a horse that is the current future wager favorite for the Preakness Stakes, so I respect that. I don't have a strong opinion on him one way or the other. I don't think he's going to win the race. Could he run second, third? Sure. At a big number, I'm inclined to include him in exotics because he has faced some good horses. He's run well against Catching Freedom. He ran well in the Arkansas Derby. He has a foundation. He's a throwback type of a racehorse, and he's a son of Justify, who's all the rage right now. So, I'm not jumping up and down about him. I'm not eager to throw him out. He's a horse that when I put my trifecta tickets together, he'll probably be in the 3rd spot.
So, Andrew, I'm kind of feeling like DZ. I'm warming up to him a little bit more as an under 2, 3, 4 type player. I would be surprised if he wins this race, but as far as hitting the board underneath, he feels like he can kind of adapt to, he can show a little bit of speed. He can pass some horses there too. What do you think about Just Steel?
I think Just Steel's best race gives him a chance at a minor award. The problem is he's never run that kind of race twice in a row, at least on the speed figures that we have handy to us by way of the ones on the screen and the ones that I have in front of me. If you look at his form, you see a couple of 90 Beyer speed figures. You see a stakes win last year. You see the second in the Arkansas Derby, where he admittedly ran pretty well. But I don't see 2 really good efforts back to back. And that's a big, big red flag for me. I think Just Steel may well be better going a little bit shorter. Both of his wins have come going around 1 turn. Yes, he has a win over the Churchill down surface, which is fine. I think he'll be stalking and have a decent trip. By the way, shout out to Keith Asmussen, because he has improved a ton in the last 6 months as a rider. Last fall at Keeneland, when he started getting on horses, that dude was an anchor. He has come a long way in a pretty short amount of time to where he's got a number of high-quality mounts, and good on him for that. As far as Just Steel goes, though, not the horse for me in this particular spot. He's got to show he can run that kind of race more than once every couple of starts. He's got to start stringing them together, and I don't think he does that in this spot. And even if he runs that race in the Arkansas Derby, I don't know if that's enough to threaten the top horses that we'll see him run against in here.
DZ, the wise guy right now, Honor Marie. And it makes sense too. You look at his form overall. He had some good races last year. He's proven at Churchill Downs. He wins the Jockey Club. Then he's off from November to February, shows back up in February, runs 5th in that very strong renewal of the Risen Star we just looked at. And then he took a nice step forward, as you would hope, in his second start. And he's been training really, really well in the mornings. The knock would be he seems like he is a pretty true closer. He just doesn't really seem like he has much early speed. So that would be a major knock. And if you thought you were going to get 20-1, I'd say 12. That's what we were talking with David Aragona a little bit earlier, probably in that range, maybe more like 12 to 15 if it's good. What do you think about Honor Marie, DZ?
I mean, I can't play him at 12-1. That's way too low. Well, here's the thing. Look, I will freely admit I've watched him in the morning. The April 25th work is excellent. Looks like a horse that's thriving. A lot of people in the backstretch like him. He's that horse that comes up every year that people tell you about, the 10 most wanted, the Sweet Northern Saint. The horse that, like you said, is the wise guy horse. The intangible part of that is that the wise guy horse never wins, but we'll forget that part. Well, let me ask this question. He ran in the Louisiana Derby, a race where he was second race back off the layoff, a race that you figured he was going to take a step forward, and he did. But coming out of that race, why am I supposed to like him more than Catching Freedom?
I know.
I mean, he was in front of Catching Freedom. Catching Freedom, I'm not saying that he made him look like, there was no doubt about it that once they hit the top of the stretch, Catching Freedom was going by him. He ran on well, and he didn't get his doors blown off. But Catching Freedom ran a much better final quarter mile than this horse did. So I understand why people like him. I get it. The training, third off the layoff. He's got the big win at Churchill. By the way, the record of horses that win the Kentucky Jockey Club in the Kentucky Derby is not good at all. But I don't get why I'm supposed to like this horse more than Catching Freedom.
Andrew, Honor Marie, the wise guy horse right now as we sit Monday evening recording this.
Yeah, you guys mentioned buzz horses, and I mentioned on Twitter how I fell victim to one of those. It's a rookie mistake. I fell victim when Intense Holiday was burning up the Churchill Downs track the year California Chrome ran and never once looked like a loser. So that one stays with you for a little while, and it's an expensive lesson that you wind up learning. I picked Honor Marie third, but I agree with Darin in that if you like Honor Marie, you have to really like Catching Freedom, who didn't just beat Honor Marie in the Louisiana Derby, also beat him in the Risen Star. I grant you that Honor Marie might have needed a race, but it's not like Catching Freedom edged Honor Marie that day. He was considerably further in front of Honor Marie with a trip that didn't do him any favors. Honor Marie is a really nice horse. Reminds me a lot of his sire Honor Code with the running style that he has, just coming from way out of the clouds. He's going to appeal to a lot of recreational players with that last out work and with his late running style. At 20-1, if I can get that now from either of you, I will play him. As it stands now, though, he'll be on the bottom of some of my exotics tickets. He'll be on my wider pick 4s and pick 3s and tickets of that sort. But at 12-1 or so, that hits me as an underlay. 15-1 seems about right, and I wouldn't fault you for taking a swing at that point. But to go back to Darin's point, if you like this horse, you have to really like Catching Freedom. And I'm not hearing a lot about Catching Freedom at all compared to this horse.
Just a touch, lightly raced. He has stepped forward in each of his 3 starts. He was second in the Bluegrass. He was a very good runner-up that day, DZ. And, he's the types of horses that you see improving rapidly because he's only had a few months worth of races. And he just seems like he takes and he gains a lot out of each of them. The performance in the Gotham was good. It was sort of a strange trip, and it was a really weird track that day. So he finally got a fast track for the first time in his career in the Bluegrass, and he ran really well that day. He still only has the 1 career victory with the runner-up efforts in the Gotham and in the Bluegrass, but super talented. And the Brad Cox runners, there's another one right next door. They do sort of complement each other running styles-wise. Like this one, will be a lot closer up. You have Catching Freedom, who's going to be more mid-pack to coming from way out of it. And Cino's got a little versatility to him. I think he'll be more forward, but we could talk about these 2 Brad Cox runners right next to each other. First, Just a Touch.
Yeah, a speedier version of Mage on paper.
Right.
Very similar profile, horse that didn't begin until late January, couple of runner-up tries after the maiden win. Very, very similar profile. Thought he ran extremely well in the Bluegrass Stakes. Prompting what was a very fast pace. Not going to really knock him for not being able to hold off Sierra Leone. Did the majority of the running, made the lead mid-stretch, fought gamely to the wire. My question coming out of that race is kind of similar to the Honor Marie question of why is this horse supposed to be better at a mile and a quarter than Sierra Leone is? I guess that's a legitimate question. I don't know how far this horse wants to go. I know he's got a pedigree that says mile and a quarter is okay, but based on what I saw in the Bluegrass, I don't know why I'm supposed to expect him to take a jump forward going an extra furlong. I think there's a lot of pace signed on in this race. He's going to face a lot of pressure. He's going to be kind of stuck in between horses that could be lining up 4 or 5 across the track, facing a really difficult task there. He wouldn't shock me. I'm not in love with him. I'm kind of on the fence with him right now. Another one where you let the odds board be your guide, but I haven't formed a truly strong opinion one way or another about him at this point.
Andrew, talk about Just a Touch, and then we can go to Encino after that.
Sure. So Just a Touch is just a touch on the inexperienced side. Waka, waka, waka. I'm ducking the tomatoes that you guys are throwing at your screens right now.
Well, I'm ducking the tomatoes because I thought after Mage last year, you would have learned your lesson with that one.
Hey, I did okay with Mage last year.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So with Just a Touch, though, Darin touched on the pedigree. And if this horse isn't supposed to go to 1.25 miles, I don't know what horses are supposed to go 1.25 miles anymore. You see Justify, you see a Tappet mare, and you see a horse that has some tactical speed. That start in the Bluegrass was his first start going 2 turns. That mile at Aqueduct is a 1-turn mile. This horse has had a lot thrown at him in a very short amount of time, and I thought he ran very well in the Bluegrass, being up that close to a pretty fast pace. If you're looking at the Brad Cox trainees and you see, okay, Catching Freedom is the horse that's going to be way, way back and make one run. Encino, if you had to use this term, would probably be the rabbit. Just a Touch is probably the horse that gets first run at about the 3/8 pole, and you see how much horse you have at that point. Do I think he's a gigantic win contender? I can't quite go that far, but if you're looking at the odds board and you think Honor Marie is going to come down, you think a couple of other potential Wise Guy horses are going to come down, some horses have to come up. And I think it Just a Touch comes up to that 13-1, 15-1 range.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of value and upside there. He'll be on a couple of my wider tickets solely because I think he may very well have first run on some of those horses that we know are going to go early. And from there, it's just a matter of how much gas is left in the tank.
You got the rabbit emoji out a minute ago for Encino when you were talking about him. He won the Lexington. He's won 3 in a row. So he showed us he can get dirt, but he just hasn't really faced anyone of near this caliber.
No. And this is a horse that I liked a lot in the Lexington. He wound up never looking like a loser that day and beat a decent horse. The Wine Steward is going to make his presence felt later in the year. That was his first start of the season. But I look at this horse and I just don't think he's fast enough to go 1.25 miles against this bunch. He's in this race for the right reasons, but to me, this looks like the horse that Brad Cox is going to send early in hopes of setting things up for his other 2 charges coming down the lane.
DZ, we have Encino at 20-1. You saw him at Turfway. He had some good success over there and then won the Lexington.
Well, Andrew likes when I disagree with him, so I'm not going to disagree with him about what I think his chances are. I don't think this horse is in here to be a rabbit. I don't think Godolphin is letting you put a horse in the Kentucky Derby to operate as a rabbit. This horse, from everything that I heard, was for the last 2 weeks 50-50 to run in this race. And the horse had to train extremely well in order to show Brad Cox that he can come back in 3 weeks and run in the Derby, because their plan coming out of the Lexington and up until about 6 days ago was to run this horse in the Preakness. He's just working and training too well by all accounts, that he's in too good a form right now for them to not take a shot. And based on that, I think he's in this race to run the race. I don't think he's in the race to set things up for Catching Freedom, because I think if he goes too fast early, I don't think it helps Just a Touch at all, which is another Brad Cox horse in the race. So I'm not thrilled about his chances here. He's probably not going to be on any of my tickets, but I don't think he's in this thing to be Song and a Prayer, Spanish Chestnut. I'm going to run the first 7 furlongs and then let all hell break loose. I think he's in the race to run.
Fantastic pull with Song and a Prayer, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
DZ, T.O. Password has 2 races, and right next door to him, Forever Young, is a horse who has a lot more of a body of work that we can look at. We can get a sense for who he is. I really have no idea what to expect from T.O. Password here.
You and me both. Yeah, I mean, his trainer, Daisuke Takayanagi, trained T.O. Keynes, who has been one of the better Japanese dirt runners of the last 5 years. So I respect the connections. He's actually got a pretty cool story. He actually was an assistant trainer at Churchill Downs back in 2017 as he was kind of learning the ropes and working to become a primary trainer on the JRA circuit. So he's actually been on the backstretch of Churchill Downs in the past. Now, that being said, this horse in Japan has early speed. If you go and you watch his races, they're wire-to-wire wins. I don't know how that speed translates here. I have no clue. He won a race in the Fukuru Stakes that, is a very good race for 3-year-olds on dirt in Japan. What that means, I don't know. I would be shocked if he won because I think the other Japanese horse has a much better chance. He's only got 2 races. I mean, this is one of the more perplexing Derby entrants that we've seen. But it's entirely possible that if his speed legitimately transitions, he's one that could definitely also liven up the early pace.
Andrew, we can talk about both of the Japanese horses. They're right next door to each other. T.O. Password first, and then the one that I think will be much more fancied in Forever Young.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add on T.O. Password. I saw the stretch run of his last race, and he looked life and death to make the 1 1/8. I just, based off of that, I can't recommend him going 1 1/4 as anything other than a pace factor, which I think is what he's going to be. Forever Young is incredibly interesting and is the worst case scenario for any American breeder watching the Kentucky Derby. No Japanese horse has won the Kentucky Derby. No winner of the UAE Derby has won the Kentucky Derby. Forever Young, however, has done absolutely nothing wrong. In 5 starts across 3 countries, he's won all 5 times. And in a couple of them, he's been incredibly impressive. I thought his UAE Derby win, well, it didn't necessarily set the world on fire, was reasonably professional from a horse that had done a lot of traveling. Horse certainly didn't seem tired at the end of the 1 3/16 distance. I'll be using this horse underneath in the exotics for sure. And if this horse winds up winning the Kentucky Derby, I'd be willing to gamble that there is an emergency meeting of some big farms on Sunday morning in Kentucky.
DZ, with other horses becoming wise guy horses, you haven't heard as much buzz about this one over the last month, maybe. I think since the UAE Derby, right then, there were people talking about him. I haven't heard quite as much about him, and I sort of like that he's coming in under the radar. His 2 races, that last 2, so the 2 this year, first when he runs down Bookham Dano, and then in the UAE Derby, watching them, they kind of reminded me of the types of trips that you get in the Derby, where you have to be 3 or 4 deep throughout, not the easiest of trips. He's shown he can overcome those types of wide trips. I don't know if he wants to get sort of start and stopped and behind horses. Who really wants that? But he's shown that he has no problem being a little bit wide, and he never looked like he was winning that Saudi Derby. I mean, that just looked like all class.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things that I could say about this horse. Look, I've been a fan of his since the December 13th race when I watched it, and I tweeted out about the fact that the dam is a grade 2 winner. The second dam is Darling My Darling. It's classic dirt American pedigree on the bottom of it. And I ended the tweet on December 13th saying, "Look out Kentucky, #Derby 150. Look, I don't know if he's going to win, but I'll say this. He is the best horse to come out of the UAE Derby by far to run in this race. He is by far the best horse to come from Japan to run in this race. You talked about the fact that the Saudi Derby, where I've heard some people say, well, he didn't switch leads and he was life and death to get there. Okay. He didn't switch leads, but yet at a distance that we all know is lesser than how far he wants to go by a wide margin. He was still able to run down legitimate American sprint speed going a one-turn mile when he's a horse that's going to get better with more ground. Then when he stretched out to get the more ground, he switched leads on cue. The UAE Derby was never in doubt, and he looked exactly the way he's supposed to look. Now, the question is, well, there's talk that he doesn't like kickback and he's got to go wide. Look how wide he went in both those races. Yeah, the horse was 5 wide on 2 turns going 1 mile and 3/16, and he was a winner every step of the way. What does that tell you? The horse is going to keep coming. So when they come into the stretch and the horses that are up close and that are questionable to get 1.25 miles start to tire, this horse is going to keep coming. That's the problem with him. If you beat him, it's going to be with the trip. It's going to be with him something happening that he's not going to like. But you can argue, and I don't even think you can argue, I think you flat out say that of all the horses in this field, he has handled the most adversity and still has not lost a race. And if that doesn't convince you that this horse is a legitimate player, I don't know what does. Some people are going to say a horse is going to win from Dubai or Japan, and they're going to beat me when it happens, and that's fine. But speaking for a lot of people that have been banging the drum about Japanese breeding for years, it's going to happen. It's only a question of when. And maybe this is the road to get there. Because if you remember last year, Dermo Sotogake ran really, really well.
Yup.
Really, really well. Like, left at the gate, got away 17th, made up a ton of ground, was in contention, and got beat about 5.5 lengths. And if he had a better start, he probably gets beat 3 lengths. This horse is better at this point than Dermo Sotogake was. And I don't know beyond the top 2 how good this field is. So don't be surprised when at the top of the stretch, this horse gets a big call. I think he's in the number.
So really quickly, I'm glad you mentioned Dermo Sotogake last year, because with a better start, I don't know if he wins, but he's no worse than 3rd. I pointed that out on Twitter right after the race, and some idiot got big mad about it and tried calling me a Japanese racing apologist and all of this other stuff. Look, if you don't think Forever Young wins this race, that's fine. If you're taking a stance against the UAE Derby runners coming over, I understand that a little bit. If you don't think that Japan is breeding horses to go 1.25 miles better than we are right now, and that that's not going to become incredibly evident over the next 10 years, I question your logic.
Yeah. Well, and just to add to that, Gino, what more proof do you need, to Andrew's point, than Dermo Sotogake off a 6-month layoff, going back to Japan, missing a race because of a bruised foot, and then shipping back to the United States, running 2nd, beating 1.5 lengths in the Breeders' Cup Classic as a 3-year-old, having not run since the Derby? What more do you need?
Not much more. Not much more. I think this is as good of a chance that they've ever had. I really do. This horse just seems to me like the signs are all starting to point to this happening soon. We know it's going to be sooner rather than later. And I'm expecting him to run a really big race in here. Let's move to right next door. Track Phantom, who will add the blinkers for this one, DZ. He's been pretty one-dimensional. Now, if you're looking at speed figures, he has continued to improve, and he's lost to horses that are in here that are some nice horses, Sierra Leone, Catching Freedom. I just don't know if he's going to be able to sit off the pace at all. He's never shown us that. And is he even the fastest horse in here? The intent seems to be there with the blinkers on. So at the very least, I think he's going to be one of the horses that makes this a quick pace, because I don't think he wants to be behind horses, and I don't think they're going to even try that with him.
Would be a cool story. Joel Rosario recently being inducted into the Hall of Fame, or being announced that he's going to be inducted. Steve Asmussen searching for the first Derby win. Them getting together here would be a very cool story. Just the profile of a horse that seemed to excel earlier in the winter at the races that were a mile and a 16th. And as the races have gotten longer, he's gotten a bit more fatigued coming to the wire. I would be surprised if now going a mile and a quarter, if he was going to suddenly step forward and beat some of these horses. He's a nice horse. They have to run him in here. He's another one that if he ran in a Pat Day mile, I would say has a huge chance to win. I would be surprised if he stretches out to the mile and a quarter and wins here.
Andrew, Track Phantom is a pace factor in here.
One quick note on Track Phantom, just because you have the past performances up on the screen right now. Depending on when you got your past performances and where you got them from, that April 28th work may or may not be in your past performances. So just keep an eye out for that. If you were early and you wanted to be the early bird that gets the worm, just know not all works may be reflected in that copy that you have. So just make sure that you double check, and every once in a while you find something. Having said that, though, I think Track Phantom is going the wrong way. This is a horse that looked great when he won the Lecomte wire to wire, and he ran, I thought, pretty well when second in the Risen Star, which we've already said, hey, key prep race. But then they stretched this horse out in the Louisiana Derby, and he gets run down again by a couple of horses that he beat going a mile and an eighth. There are stamina issues with this pedigree. Quality Road can get you anything. Miss Sunset was a sprinter type. I think this is a one-turn miler that's running in the wrong races for the right reasons. I've said that a fair bit. The blinkers go on. A couple of the recent works are okay, but it's not the Steve Asmussen work pattern that I really like. I like that work pattern where it's 2 works back is the big one, and then the maintenance move. This to me seems like, okay, our best chance is going to the front. We're going to the front, and if you're passing us, you're going way too fast. And those horses in the Kentucky Derby don't have the best track record.
DZ at 50-1. West Saratoga has not been within 4 lengths in the last few. Now, he does have a win at Churchill, but since that Iroquois win, he has not run a race anything really even competitive in any of the races he was in. He was second in the Jeff Ruby, but he was well defeated by Endlessly that day, and he would really, really need to step up in here. I just can't get it.
Great story.
Awesome story.
Great story.
Great story.
$11,000 Keeneland purchase as a yearling. Larry Demritt, Bahamian born. I believe he's the first African-American to train a horse in the Kentucky Derby since 1989, 88, 89. I believe just the 4th since the Great Depression, which is obviously indication of a much larger issue that is worthy of a conversation on a separate platform. But yeah, I agree. He's never run a race remotely close to fast enough to win. Rich Strike won this race coming off of a loss in the Jeff Ruby Stakes and shocked the hell out of me. West Saratoga would equally shock the hell out of me.
Andrew, 50-1, one of the 50-1 shots. And this one, I can't really build a case for.
Nope. Awesome story. You're going to hear a lot about it on the NBC broadcast. Well worth your time. Anytime you can get an $11,000 horse into the Kentucky Derby, that's really freaking cool. Really freaking cool, though, doesn't cash a whole lot of tickets. No thanks for me.
DZ Endlessly was very impressive, winning the Jeff Ruby Stakes on the synthetic at Turfway. He's 2 for 2 on the synthetic. He only has 1 loss in his career. And it was in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf when he was 5-1. He's a really talented horse. We'll just have to ask the dirt question with him. I mean, he comes into it 3rd start off the bench, and he's improving, and he does have a lot of positive things going for him, but it's a very big question, having to make your career debut on the dirt here.
To make the Animal Kingdom comparison here, because this is a profile of a horse that was similar to Animal Kingdom.
Yep.
Rich Strike was not the same because Rich Strike had won at Churchill Downs. Here's the difference. And again, we talked about this earlier on. Animal Kingdom had a monster work at Churchill Downs. Endlessly did not. The work 2 back was poor. He was being scrubbed on to keep up with a workmate. It didn't look like he was getting over the track. The most recent work was better. But trainer Michael McCarthy has said that this horse has has worked on dirt 30 some odd times since he's had him in the barn. Sometimes the work is okay, sometimes it's not. He has absolutely no idea what this horse is going to do on dirt. And you get the feeling a little bit that if Mike McCarthy had it his way, this horse would be running in the American turf. I don't think McCarthy wanted to run him here. I think the owners wanted to run here. I think he had other ideas for this horse. My guess is this is going to be a situation where he runs on the dirt here, and his next start is right back on the turf in 6 to 8 weeks' time.
Darin, you're an owner. You do a lot of the stuff with Thoroughcrab.
Yep.
If your trainer came to you and said, we have a horse that has enough points to make the Derby field, I don't think he can run on dirt, what do you do?
Assuming that he's telling me that he's a special horse with a big future, and if we don't mess with him, he can do really good things, I would skip the race.
Correct answer. I hate when owners train horses. There's every chance that Endlessly wins this race and makes us all look really silly. But I think Endlessly would probably be favored in the American turf. I don't think there's any world beaters there. That's a big purse. You go from there, you get races like the Belmont Derby, the Saratoga Derby, and then if the horse develops, you'll wind up with a horse that could contest the Breeders' Cup Turf later on this year. And that route, by the way, could very well still get you champion 3-year-old male honors. I understand why they're here. Derby fever is a very real thing. If this horse takes to dirt, it will do so beating me.
Yeah, he's a horse who I want to like a little bit more just because his overall form is so good. This is just a really tough ask for him in this spot. Right next door is Domestic Product, DZ. For these connections, you kind of scratch your head and go, Chad Brown and Irad Ortiz Jr., this is going to be a horse that's 30-1, but he just hasn't run fast enough on speed figures to be considered a top-tier contender in here. Now, he did outfinish Fierceness in the Holy Bull, and Fierceness didn't really fire his best shot that day, and he was able to get brave in between horses. Like, he's got ability. He has talent. I just don't know if this is the right spot for him right now.
Wouldn't it be a funny story if after choosing off of Fierceness in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, which could potentially go down in history as one of the worst decisions ever made by a jockey.
Talk about the old-time backfire.
Yeah. If Irad Ortiz Jr. could then beat Fierceness in the Kentucky Derby with Domestic Product. Look, I agree with you. I think he's a nice horse. It's worth mentioning that this horse finished in front of Fierceness 2 starts back in the Holy Bull Stakes. The Tampa Bay Derby was a very weird situation. The race was delayed. It ended up being a non-wagering event due to internet communications issues that impacted the tote system. The race was run in standard bred type fractions. That it was a very, very strange race. Everything about it was weird. Chad is playing a little coy about this horse, that I think he likes him a little bit more than that you would expect him to. And it is worth mentioning that if you go back and you watch the workout where he worked in company with Sierra Leone on April the 27th, he worked a little bit better than Sierra Leone did in that work. Now, I don't know if that means anything. And a horse coming off of a win in the Tampa Bay Derby, not run for 2 months off an 82 buyer figure, is probably going to beat me if he's going to win this race. But there's just a couple of weird angles about this horse that I'm not picking him, but it just makes me kind of put my finger to my chin and go, I don't know. What do you think, Andrew?
First of all, I think I need to unmute a little bit quicker. My finger slipped and it popped up like I had right-clicked the unmute button. But I'm going to get a little crazy with you here, because on an episode of Drankin' Champagne over on the On the Wrong Lead Network, the format that Josh Rodriguez and I do is we do a best bet, a live long shot, and a bold prediction. My bold prediction was Domestic Product beats his stablemate in the Kentucky Derby.
There you go.
Now, I'm very happy you mentioned that he did beat Fierceness in the Holy Bull. As handicappers, we tend to make excuses for when horses don't run well, and we don't give credit to horses that run well.
Yeah,
That's
fair.
it's part of the pursuit of value. And I've said that at least once as we've recorded a couple of these hits. Domestic Product has not gotten any pace to lay way back and come catch in his last couple of starts. And I think that's what this horse wants to do. Remember, going a mile and a 16th at Gulfstream Park, that's not friendly to closers. You turn for home and there's the wire. It's a very short stretch. Hades had everything all his own way, and the only horse moving late in that race was Domestic Product. And then they go to Tampa. I'll go there. It was a toad outage. And I think that as handicappers, we're devaluing that race a little bit because we couldn't bet on it. And it's one of those weird societal quirks to where, because of that, you have a horse at 30-1 that's finally going to get some pace to close into, with arguably the best rider in the country on him, with arguably the best trainer that has yet to win the Kentucky Derby sending him out, and he's 30-1 on the morning line and might drift up. Guys, I'm using this horse in the exotics, certainly underneath. I think there's every chance he clunks up and hits the board at a massive number.
My one question for you is based on pedigree. I'm not sold about the 1.25 miles.
I would be a lot more hesitant to back this horse because of that if he was 15-1. Yep. You're telling me based on the resume he's going to be 30, 40-1. I will absolutely take that shot at that price.
Fair enough.
Let's keep rolling along, fellas. We have another big long shot, Grand Mo the first. He was able to now draw in the last few days before the field was entered. The Tampa Bay Derby, DZ, he looked for a minute like he was going to win the race there late. He was getting a pretty good trip. The problem is that's the type of trip that a horse like this needs to seal the deal in, when Domestic Product was kind of in between horses and may not have gotten things as kind as Grand Mo the first did. He got a big figure when finishing behind Fierceness, but just no match for Fierceness in the Florida Derby. Can you build a case for him at all?
No.
Yeah.
Look, listen, I respect any horse who can win their debut going 5 furlongs over a synthetic surface and then months later get beat a neck going a mile and a 16th on dirt. That being said, how's he making up 16 lengths on Fierceness? I just can't. I could get creative. You could say, well, if you think Domestic Product is interesting, this horse was only beating a neck by him, so on and so forth. Okay, fine. He's still got to make up half of a 16th of a mile on the Derby favorite, and that's just not supposed to happen, guys.
Andrew, anything on Grand Mo?
I would like to see him try turf again. I thought his run in the Zuma Beach was not bad, and something may well have gone wrong in that race because we didn't see him for several months after that. We know he can run well on synthetics. His run in the Zuma Beach wasn't terrible. I hope we see this horse on turf at some point because he just looks like a horse that could potentially win something that matters on the grass.
Fierceness, 5-2 morning line favorite. He's number 17 here. DZ, we can see if we're looking at the past performances. Big debut, comes back in the Champagne, clunker in the slop, come back in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, huge figure, wins, crushes Muth. Then his first start of the year in the Holy Bull, really disappointing. Any time he's had things go slightly against him, he hasn't won. Now, that doesn't mean he can't moving forward, but that does mean with what we've seen so far, when he gets ideal circumstances, he's a totally different horse than when anything little is up against him.
Yeah, well, look, there's two ways to look at him. What you just said, but the Champagne Stakes, he lunged at the start. It was over a sloppy sealed racetrack. That was more than him just not getting the trip that he wanted. That was a disastrous trip from start to finish. Irad Ortiz completely threw me off because I thought the horse was just simply not that good when he opted off the horse in the Breeders' Cup. I would, in a million years, I would have thought that he stays on this horse if he thought he was any good. So that shocked the hell out of me when this horse ran the race that he did in the Breeders' Cup with Irad opting to ride, I think it was Noted, who might not have hit the board since then. The Holy Bull, now here's the interesting thing, guys. Todd Pletcher, historically, when he's going with a horse through the Florida route, sometimes he's got horses in New York as well, in Kentucky, but his Florida horse typically goes Fountain of Youth, Florida Derby. For some reason this year they changed that, and they went Holy Bull, Florida Derby. And there's definitely an argument to be made that this was a short horse in the Holy Bull, that they were looking to get a prep into him and get him queued up for the next couple of races. And if you believe that, then the Florida Derby certainly enforces that theory. Or there is the other side of the coin, where in the Holy Bull, he was put extremely wide into the first turn, had to chase after getting pinballed around, was not happy about it, did not get the dream trip, and therefore did not perform to the best of his ability. And I don't know what the answer is, but Andrew made a similar point on Sierra Leone where there were questions about his mental makeup and questions about post 2 and navigating his way through traffic. I think there are questions about this horse as well. Granted, they're far different. Is it him only winning when he gets things the way he wants them? That doesn't mean he needs the lead, by the way. He didn't have the lead in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. It just means gets the desired trip. Or is he a horse that just was a little short in the Holy Bull and had nothing go right in the Champagne? And I don't know the answer. Am I willing to gamble on that answer being a favorable one at odds of 5-2? I'm not sure. I think, like I said earlier, if he wins, I think if he's good, he wins. I think if any of that stuff about adversity is true, I don't think he runs a good second or third. I think he runs 11th. So from that standpoint, I draw a line from him to a similar horse back in the past by the name of Holy Bull, who, when he was good, and that was the majority of the time, he was sensational. But when he flipped his palette in the Fountain of Youth, he was no good. When he got off a step slow in the Kentucky Derby and got stuck behind horses, including Go for Gin, and he couldn't get towards the lead, he was no good. Fierceness could be a similar horse. I don't know. And if he goes off at 5-2, I might have some tickets where I put him on top, only on top, and have him no place else, and then toss him out of everything else. I think that's the way you're supposed to approach him. He could win by 8. He could run 12th. Neither of those two would surprise me.
Andrew, I know you have some things to say about Fierceness.
Yes, I do. I keep coming back to the same question the more we dissect the Kentucky Derby. If Fierceness runs his A race, who beats him?
No, nobody.
No one.
Nobody.
And my podcast co-host Josh Rodriguez at one point jokingly said, someone running their S race. I'm looking at this form, and I think with maybe one or two exceptions, even if another horse runs the S race, if Fierceness runs the A race, it's game over. And I think for the first time in a very long time, guys, the post position draw really mattered this year for a lot of horses in this particular field. If you flip Fierceness and Sierra Leone's post positions, I hate Fierceness because I think he gets crowded. I think he gets intimidated, and I think he gets dirt in his face. If you haven't seen this race in a long time, I highly, highly, highly urge anybody out there to go to YouTube when we're done here, not while you're listening to this. When we're done.
Can I predict what race you're going to say?
Sure.
Big Brown's Kentucky Derby.
Bingo. That's the trip Fierceness is likely to get. Yes, he'll be wide. I understand that. But the trade-off to being wide is there's no dirt in your face. And if there's no dirt in your face and you're able to negotiate a clean trip, all of a sudden, with 3/8 of a mile to go, you'll see the Fierceness that we saw with a half mile to go in the Florida Derby and a half mile to go in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, coast and widen when the other horses are starting to struggle a little bit. And if that happens, I think it's game over. Now, you'll look at Fierceness, and one of the things that I've heard from a couple of handicappers I very much respect is Fierceness can't pass other horses. Fierceness can't pass other horses. When you're fast enough to be in front of the other horses, that's not a bug, that's a feature. And I think there's every chance that Fierceness gets out, gets comfortable from that far outside post. And if he does, he's going to be very, very, very tough to beat in here. Gino, I will hand in my No Chalk Zone membership card at the door on my way out. Fierceness is the top pick here. He's going to be a single on most of my tickets in those multi-race exotics. I might play a couple of saver exactas on the off chance domestic product runs a bonkers race and it comes in domestic product Fierceness, because if I don't have that combination, I quit gambling. But Fierceness is going to be, I think, incredibly tough if he's anywhere close to the horse that we saw win the Florida Derby, win the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. No other horses put forth that kind of effort.
Gino, I think the question is, maybe to give it a little bit more modern, and I'll play it off of the race that Andrew brought up. Is Fierceness Big Brown or is he Bellamy Road? I think it's one or the other.
It's funny you mentioned Bellamy Road, because earlier this year in the series I do for the Pollock Report, the Derby Bubble, I compared horses to horses of Derby trails past. And I compared Fierceness to Bellamy Road for a lot of the same reasons, not least of which, by the way, are the comparisons you can make between Mike Rapoli and George Steinbrenner.
Right outside of Fierceness. We'll circle back to him with final thoughts when we talk about how everyone's going to play the race. Stronghold, Santa Anita Derby winner. He's a horse who I think he's better than at least one or two of his speed figures might suggest. I just, in watching his overall body of work, I think this is a really talented horse. And Andrew, you were kind of pointing it out with Fierceness. I like this horse as an underneath, like a third, fourth horse. I much prefer this outside trip than the inside trip for him. I think if he was down inside, he has the very likely race where he gets stuck in traffic, shuffled back. And then if he's 5 or 6 lengths out of it, I don't think he has much of a shot. This horse can stay wide, I think. And I'm not sure distance is really going to be a problem in watching him. He's just kind of a grinder. And I think he can just keep grinding. So both these next two horses, DZ, I'm going to use them in a lot of my exotics, probably in a couple of multis, and definitely in all of my tries and supers, both Stronghold and Resilience. In the Derby, they are just checking some of the boxes that I'm looking for horses that can run well and be successful in here. I think they have some tactical speed. I think they have a little versatility to them. I think they can pass horses. They're moving in the right direction and improving. They're not the horses who are the absolute best in the field. And I don't think in 6 months they may be, but they may be horses that can adapt to a 20-horse field, even being a little bit wide. And I think outrun their odds a little bit. So for both of these two, Stronghold and Resilience, because they do have kind of similar running styles, they actually raced against each other when Stronghold broke his maiden at Churchill Downs. So he has a win over Churchill. Resilience has run at Churchill as well. And then when you look at Stronghold, he came out of the Santa Anita Derby, not exactly sure who he beat. But when you look at the margin and you see he only won by a neck, he would have won by a lot more that day. He got stopped a couple different times. So I think it was a pretty easy victory for him there. And then right outside of him, Resilience, who was your Wood Memorial winner. He exits that really strong renewal of the Risen Star. I thought both of these horses, DZ, were live at least, 2, 3, 4 type horses that I'm envisioning that sit a little wide trip that Andrew's talking about with Fierceness. If one of these two can work out that kind of a trip, I think they can hang around for a slice at least.
I want to speak to, from my standpoint, the beauty of the ability to wager in the Kentucky Derby future wagers. Because believe it or not, in some years, it could save you money on the Derby itself. I'm live to 3 horses in the Derby future wager. Just a Touch at 31-1, Forever Young at 34-1, and Stronghold at 48-1.
That's fantastic.
I don't have to bet a dime on any of the 3 of them, and if any of them win, I'm cashing out for a big number.
Yep.
So, Stronghold, I don't think is without a chance. I didn't think he was without a chance when I bet him, which was before the Santa Anita Derby. He validated that with a good effort that day. Showing grit, showing determination. I like the fact that he's been in a dogfight. See, a lot of people get so hung up on, you got the brilliance of winning by 6 lengths wrapped up. I mean, Barbaro was a great example. Barbaro went into the Florida Derby, a potential phenom. Undefeated, winning on turf, winning on dirt, winning on sloppy tracks. He goes into the Florida Derby, and he gets into an absolute dogfight for a half a mile with Sharp Humor. And he beats him by a neck. And people kind of cooled on Barbaro because, well, it was Sharp Humor. He was a nice miler, and Barbaro should have put him away at the top of the stretch and won easier. And then what happens? Barbaro used that Florida Derby, got through the dogfight, turned into a real racehorse, and showed you what he could do in the Kentucky Derby when he did dominate the field. We get so caught up on these margins of victory and having to win by 5. Sometimes you're better off having a horse getting in a dogfight like a Silver Charm used to do, and figuring out a way to get their nose on the wire. Stronghold is going to be on my tickets. I think he's got a shot. I think if he can figure out a way to follow Fierceness around the racetrack without having to go too wide around him, I think it could work out pretty favorable for him. And I think he's got a great draw just outside of that rival.
Andrew, talk to us about the Santa Anita Derby winner.
Phil D'Amato actually said a lot of the same things you did, Darin, about the draw and how the draw helped him being outside of Fierceness and using Fierceness as sort of a lead blocker to hopefully get Stronghold into a good spot. Stronghold is the last horse I'm throwing out, which, Darin, probably you have dollar signs in your eyes right now, because anytime a handicapper says this is the last horse I'm throwing out, it is a remarkable percentage of time how often that horse burns you. I like Stronghold a lot as a racehorse. I respect him. If you do something that some of our listeners are going to throw tomatoes at their listening devices for me even suggesting, which is act like Bob Baffert horses don't exist, he's won 5 in a row. And for intents and purposes with the Derby, Baffert horses don't exist. So you have a horse that has done plenty, routed very early in the career, and beat a couple of horses that wound up showing up in this spot. My goodness, that October 1st race at Churchill Downs turned out to be a key race, and nobody saw it coming. I like the fact that this horse seems to have developed from age 2 to age 3. He didn't beat a lot in the Sunland Derby, but I like what he showed in the Santa Anita Derby, racing between horses and beating maybe not Bob Baffert's most talented 3-year-old, but a decent horse in Imagination by a neck. My concern with him has to do with the pedigree. I don't think this is a 1.25 mile pedigree. I see Ghost Sapper on top. I see a Jimmy Creed mare on the bottom. I worry about how far he wants to go. He's a very nice horse, and Darin, with 40-something to 1 on him, I think that's an absolutely great price. At 20 to 1, I can't quite bet him.
I think he's going to I wouldn't be shocked if he flowed 25. Because he doesn't, I don't think he's getting a lot of buzz. And I don't know he'll go way up. Either.
Yeah.
But Resilience, I could see getting bet a little bit.
Yeah. And if we want to go down into Resilience really quick, I can start on that because this is another horse coming out of the Risen Star. And this is the horse that ran 4th that day. I thought Johnny Velasquez fits him like a glove and has shown that in the last 3 starts. Breaks the maiden by 4 1/4 lengths, real easy. They go to the Risen Star, and it's pretty clear he's not quite at the level of a Sierra Leone or a Track Phantom or a Catching Freedom at that point. But he sits a really nice stalking trip, is one-paced, doesn't quit. Not a bad effort. They then ship him to the Wood Memorial, and we've talked a little bit about how hard it is to make speed figures for Aqueduct races because of how quirky that track is. The Wood Memorial came back really high on speed figures to where I question that a little bit, because unlike a number of horses that came in behind him and one horse that fell down, it looked horrible and miraculously wound up completely okay. I have no idea how that one happened. Resilience had a perfect trip in that particular race. I don't think that replicates itself. I think he regresses a little bit, especially with Johnny Velasquez, a Hall of Fame rider, going elsewhere. That's no disrespect to Junior Alvarado, who has turned into a very, very good rider. But I just thought the improvement was evident with Velasquez hopping on. I think there's reason to believe Resilience takes a step back on Saturday.
DZ hit on Resilience, and then we'll round out the field.
Yeah, I agree. Pretty much with everything Andrew just said. I think Mott picked a great prep to go to by diverting to the Wood Memorial. He avoided the major players that were in the Bluegrass by avoiding the major players in the Louisiana Derby, by avoiding the major players in the Florida Derby. I think he picked the right prep to get him into the Derby. But look who was second to him in that race. The horse to his outside, who was coming off of a maiden win, who was 106-1 in the race. Yeah, I might respect Bill Mott more than any other trainer in the game. And whenever he shows up anywhere, it automatically gets a second look for me. I think the Wood speed figures inflated. I don't think it was a strong prep race. I think it was a well-spotted move by Mott, but Resilience and Society Man will be off my tickets.
Let's finish up the field with the number 20 Society Man. Okay, so DZ, you just gave it to us right there. Andrew, do you want to make a case for him? Or if either of the also eligibles were to draw in, would you, make a case for, look at Mugatu. Just, he got in with the, his points came in 4th and 5th place finishes. Like, he's never even really been close, at all in any of these races. He was 180-1 in the Bluegrass, and he would need to improve a ton off of that. Epic Ride at least has form. That wouldn't shock you to see this horse, in the mix, showing speed, positional speed. Mugatu hasn't even really been competitive, and he's able to get in the Derby here. He's an AE, maybe he is.
But that's why you show up and run the races.
You're right.
Take heed. You run your horses. You don't bubble wrap them for 6 months waiting for the exact perfect spot if you want to get a horse in this particular race. Now, with Society Man, the only point of intrigue for me is the presence of Frankie Dettori, who postponed his retirement for a year in large part because he wanted another chance at winning the Derby. I don't think this is quite the mount that he had in mind, and I'll leave it at that.
DZ, let's put some finishing touches on the 2024 Kentucky Derby. Who are some of the horses in the mix for you? How are you looking to play it? Kind of talk it out a little bit for us and set up what you're thinking.
Yeah. So in terms of the horses that are towards the top of my logic right now, I'll start with Forever Young, who I think is going to be a major part of what I do in the race. Then from there, I'll start from the inside. I have not made up my mind yet on whether or not I'm going to use Dornach. Sierra Leone, I'm going to use underneath in certain combos. Mystic Dan is going to be a B-type horse for me. Catching Freedom will be an underneath for me. Just Steel is a deep underneath. Anna Marie is a deep underneath. Just a Touch is a deep underneath. Then I got a long gap back to the rest where I might toss in Domestic Product, and I might use Stronghold in a spot in the second tier underneath Forever Young. So kind of looking at Forever Young, maybe Stronghold, Mystic Dan as my 1, 2, 3 right now, with Sierra Leone probably leading the next flank. I am going to have an approach on Fierceness where if I get the right combination of horses leading into the Derby in a pick 4 or a pick 5, I'm not going to say I will pay alive to him for 6,000 because I had a couple of bombs and I'm going to let him beat me. But that would probably be the only situation that I have Fierceness. I'm going to try to beat him just about everywhere else.
Andrew, put a bow on some of our Derby analysis.
Fierceness is a lone A. How's that for a bow?
There you go. lots of different opinions, lots of different thoughts. Hopefully we gave you some nice information about all of the horses in this field, and we wish you the best of luck on a fantastic couple days of racing coming up. If you just listened to the Derby preview, Andrew and Darin actually helped with the Oaks runners. Also, we got to talk all about different things you can expect from them leading up this week. But for both of you guys, I think it seems like the best place to follow, if anyone always wants to follow along with any of your stuff, any of your content, anything you have important going on, probably best on Twitter. They're now X, right, DZ? So that would be at the track 7, and then Andrew Champagne on Twitter at Andrew Champagne.
Yep, got me right. At the track 7, I'll be putting out content all week. Check out, I don't know if you're going to have this up for Tuesday night, but we're going to do the trainers dinner. We'll probably have some videos up from there. And we'll see if we get any real information out of the trainers. You never, normally at that dinner, everyone's training out of their minds. They couldn't be doing any better. I wouldn't trade places with anybody else, that kind of stuff. But we'll see if we get any good quality info out of it.
Yeah, and for me, Twitter is right, at Andrew Champagne. You can also check out the site I do a lot of work on for the day job, and that's winnersandwhiners.com. We've been doing a lot more horse racing coverage the past couple of months. I'll be doing a lot of stuff for them on their YouTube channel, which you can find at Winners and Whiners. And if I've got some spare time between now and Tuesday night, I'm going to try my hand at writing some jokes for DZ that I'm sure are going to go over just fantastically well at that trainer's dinner.
I'm very lucky to have a couple good friends that will sit down and spend a couple hours going through every horse in the Oaks field, every horse in the Derby field. You guys always open my eyes to a few things that I might have missed when I was going through, and I always trust the work that you put in. So, fellas, thanks so much. It's fun always going back and forth with you throughout the years in our group chats. We have, we watched so many of these races, and it builds to this moment. So I wish you all the best of luck in the big race and in all the races leading up to it. Darin Zoccali, Andrew Champagne, thanks so much to all of you for listening in. Remember, we have individual videos of all of these on the YouTube channel and on Twitter. And then if you want to just kick back and hear them all on the podcast, we put them all together for you there. So Andrew Champagne, Darin Zoccali, and I say goodbye. We wish you the best of luck for the Oaks and the Derby.